The Grand Ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton was transformed into a golden wonderland for my parents' 30th anniversary celebration. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over round tables draped in ivory silk, each centerpiece a towering arrangement of white roses and baby's breath that probably cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget. 300 guests mingled beneath the vaulted ceiling, their designer gowns and tailored tuxedos creating a sea of understated wealth and social importance. I stood near the entrance in my simple black dress from Nordstrom Rack, watching the parade of Los Angeles elite air kiss their way through the reception. Real estate moguls, entertainment lawyers, tech entrepreneurs, and plastic surgeons, the usual crowd that orbited around my parents' social sphere like planets around the sun. "Isabella, darling." My mother's voice cut through the ambient chatter like a knife through silk. Elena Rodriguez Martinez glided toward me in a custom Valentino gown that hugged her still remarkable figure, her honey blonde hair swept into an elegant chignon that had probably required 3 hours at the salon. At 52 she looked at least a decade younger, thanks to the best plastic surgeon's money could buy. "Mom, you look beautiful," I said, meaning it despite everything. She really did look stunning. Every inch the successful pharmaceutical executive who'd built Rodriguez Biotechnology from a small startup into a billion-dollar empire. "Thank you, sweetheart." She air-kissed my cheeks, careful not to disturb her makeup. "Though I have to say that dress is quaint. Did you shop at Target again?" Before I could answer, my father appeared beside her, resplendent in his custom Tom Ford tuxedo. Richard Martinez commanded attention wherever he went, his silver hair perfectly styled, his presence filling the space around him like expensive cologne. At 55 he was still the handsome construction magnate who'd swept my mother off her feet 3 decades ago. "There's my little girl," he said, wrapping me in a hug that smelled of cigars and cologne. "How are you holding up? I know these fancy parties aren't really your scene." The words stung, though I kept my expression neutral. They assumed I felt out of place because I couldn't afford to be here, not because I chose to live differently. "I'm fine, Dad. Congratulations on 30 years. "Thank you, Mija." He beamed with genuine pride. "Your mother and I were just discussing the evening's expenses. This party cost more than most people make in 5 years, but it's worth it to celebrate with everyone we love." Mom nodded, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light as she gestured around the ballroom. The venue alone was $80,000, and don't get me started on the catering costs. Thank goodness we could afford it without asking anyone to contribute. She paused, her eyes scanning my outfit with barely concealed disappointment. "Speaking of contributions, don't worry about chipping in for anything tonight, sweetheart. We know you can't afford it." The words hit me like a slap, though she delivered them with the kind of smile people use when they think they're being kind. Around us, other family members began to gather. My brother Antonio in his Armani suit, his wife Sophia dripping in jewelry, my sister Carmen with her hedge fund manager husband David. "That's very thoughtful," I replied quietly, though my jaw was clenched tight enough to crack teeth. "It really is," Carmen chimed in, appearing at my elbow with a champagne flute that probably cost more than my monthly rent. We all pitched in for the flowers alone. $15,000, can you believe it? But Isabella shouldn't worry about that kind of expense. Antonio laughed, the sound sharp and grating. "Isabella's still figuring out her career path. Can't expect her to contribute to family celebrations when she's barely keeping her own lights on." Now, Mom said, though her tone suggested she agreed completely. "Isabella is doing her best. Not everyone can be as successful as the rest of you." I felt the familiar burn of humiliation rise in my chest. Here I was, surrounded by my family at what should be a joyous celebration, and they were discussing my supposed poverty like I wasn't standing right there. "Besides," Sophia added with false sweetness, "someone has to be the struggling artist in the family. It's almost romantic living that bohemian lifestyle." "I'm not an artist," I said quietly. "I work in finance." "Of course you do, sweetheart," Mom said in the tone people use with children who claim they're going to be astronauts. "Your little bookkeeping job. How is that going?" Before I could correct her, for the 100th time, about what I actually did for work, the conversation was interrupted by the arrival of my Uncle Roberto and Aunt Patricia, both dressed to the nines and radiating the kind of confidence that comes from serious money. "Elena." "Richard." Uncle Roberto boomed, embracing my parents with the enthusiasm of someone who'd already had several drinks. What a magnificent party. You've outdone yourselves. The cost must have been astronomical, Aunt Patricia added, her eyes scanning the elaborate decorations with obvious calculation. Good thing you're both doing so well financially. Not everyone could afford this kind of celebration. She glanced at me meaningfully and I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment. The implication was clear. Unlike some people in the family, my parents could actually afford to throw parties like this. Well, Mom said, following Patricia's gaze to me, we're fortunate that we don't need to ask for help. Some families have to depend on their children to contribute to these kinds of events, but thankfully we're self-sufficient. The words were like daggers, each one carefully aimed to remind me of my place in the family hierarchy. I was the poor relation, the one who couldn't contribute, the disappointment who had to be carried by more successful family members. Speaking of contributions, Carmen said, her voice taking on that particular tone she used when she wanted to make a point. Did everyone see the wedding announcement in the Times? The Hendersons' daughter is getting married at the Four Seasons. The reception alone is costing $300,000. $300,000. Sophia gasped with delight. How wonderful for them. Of course, not everyone can afford that kind of celebration. Another pointed look at me. I was starting to feel like a zoo animal being observed by visitors who weren't quite sure what species I was. The Hendersons are old money, Dad explained, swirling his whiskey. They understand the importance of maintaining certain standards. Some people prioritize different things. Like what? I asked, though I immediately regretted the question. Antonio laughed. Like living in tiny apartments and driving cars from the last century. Not everyone values success the same way, apparently. The conversation was becoming increasingly unbearable. Every comment, every glance, every seemingly innocent observation was designed to highlight my supposed failures and limitations. I was the family charity case, the one who needed protection from financial reality. Isabella doesn't need to worry about these things, Mom said with false kindness. She's still finding her way. Not everyone reaches their potential at the same pace. Or at all, Carmen muttered into her champagne, though not quite quietly enough. I felt something snap inside me like a rubber band stretched too far. 3 years of this treatment, 3 years of being dismissed and patronized and treated like a child who couldn't understand adult conversations about money. 3 years of watching my family spend money like water while assuming I was drowning in debt. Actually, I said quietly, pulling out my phone, I think there's been a misunderstanding. What kind of misunderstanding? Mom asked, her tone suggesting she was humoring a confused child. Instead of answering, I opened my banking app and turned the screen toward her. The number at the top was clear and unmistakable. $2,847,632,194.73. For a moment nobody spoke. Mom stared at the screen like it was written in a foreign language she couldn't quite translate. Her champagne flute trembled in her hand. That's... She started, then stopped, blinking rapidly. That says... $2.8 billion, I said calmly. Give or take a few million. The champagne flute slipped from her fingers and shattered against the marble floor, sending crystal shards and golden liquid across her designer shoes. The sound seemed to echo through our little circle, drawing curious glances from other guests. That's impossible, Carmen breathed, her face going pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. Is it? I asked, refreshing the screen to show the real-time balance. Because it seems pretty real to me. Antonio grabbed the phone from my hands, his eyes scanning the screen with desperate intensity. This has to be fake. You can't just... This isn't possible. Give me that, Dad said, taking the phone and adjusting his reading glasses. His face went through several color changes as he processed what he was seeing. Isabella, this says you have nearly $3 billion. I know, I replied. I put it there. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear conversations from other tables, the clink of silverware against china, the distant sound of the jazz quartet playing in the corner. My family stood frozen like statues, their faces a mixture of shock, disbelief and dawning horror. How? Mom whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm very good at what I do, I said simply. Turns out my little bookkeeping job is actually running one of the most successful investment firms on the West Coast. Sophia made a sound like air escaping from a balloon. Investment firm? Sterling Capital Management, I said, watching recognition dawn on David's face. As a hedge fund manager, he knew the name. Sterling Capital? David gasped. You work for Sterling Capital? I don't work for them, I corrected. I own them. I founded the company 6 years ago with $5 million I made day trading while I was getting my MBA. We now manage assets worth over $15 billion. The number seemed to hit them like physical blows. Carmen sat down heavily in a nearby chair, her face ashen. Antonio was still staring at my phone like it might suddenly reveal that this was all an elaborate prank. But you live in that tiny apartment, Patricia said weakly. I live in a penthouse in Century City that I bought for $12 million, I corrected. The tiny apartment is my office building's address that I use for privacy. I own the entire building, actually. Dad's hands were shaking as he handed my phone back to me. Isabella, if this is true, if you really have this kind of money, why didn't you tell us? The question hung in the air like smoke. I looked around at these people who had spent 3 years treating me like a charity case, who had just finished explaining to me why I couldn't afford to contribute to their party, and I felt a complex mixture of hurt and vindication. When would I have told you? I asked. During one of our conversations about my failures? While you were explaining why I couldn't afford things? While you were discussing my poverty like I wasn't standing right here? Mom's face crumpled. We didn't mean, we thought. You thought what you wanted to think, I said, my voice getting stronger. You decided I was unsuccessful, and you never bothered to look any deeper. But the car, Carmen said desperately. You drive that old Honda. I like the Honda. It's reliable and unpretentious. Though I also have the Tesla, the Porsche, and the vintage Jaguar collection. The clothes, Sophia added weakly. I prefer simple clothes. Though my closet also contains plenty of designer pieces that I wear when the occasion calls for it. I looked around at their shocked faces and felt a strange sense of liberation. The secret I'd been keeping for 3 years was finally out, and with it came a flood of revelations that would change everything. There's something else you should know, I said quietly. The reason you've been able to afford this lifestyle, this party, these expensive celebrations. I paused, watching their faces carefully. For the past 3 years I've been anonymously supporting this family. The mysterious investor who saved Dad's company during the recession? That was me. The silent partner who funded the European expansion? Me. The anonymous donor who paid for Mom's mother's cancer treatments? Also me. The silence was deafening. Dad's face had gone completely white. The construction company bailout, he whispered. Phoenix Holdings. That's one of my shell companies, I confirmed. When you were facing bankruptcy 2 years ago, when the banks wouldn't extend your credit line, I stepped in. You never knew it was me because I wanted to help without the family drama. Mom sat down heavily, her elegant composure completely shattered. How much? Altogether, about $63 million over 3 years. Construction company bailout, biotech research funding, real estate investments, medical bills, your mortgage when you were behind on payments. I pulled up another screen on my phone, showing a detailed spreadsheet that I'd been maintaining. Here's the breakdown. Martinez Construction bailout $18 million. Rodriguez Biotechnology Research funding $22 million. Family medical expenses $8 million. Mortgage assistance $4 million. Various smaller emergencies and gifts $11 million. The numbers fell like hammer blows. My family stared at the screen in stunned silence, processing the fact that their comfortable lifestyle had been subsidized by the daughter they'd been treating like a failure. But why? Patricia asked, tears starting to form in her eyes. Because I love you, I said simply. Because you're my family and I wanted you to succeed. Because I thought that if I could help you quietly without any fanfare or recognition, you might eventually see me for who I really am instead of who you assumed I was. We had no idea, Mom whispered, mascara starting to run down her cheeks. No, you didn't, I agreed. Biz, you never asked. You never showed any interest in my actual life, my actual work, my actual success. You were too busy feeling sorry for me to notice that I didn't need your pity. The conversation was attracting attention from other guests. I could see people at nearby tables starting to stare, drawn by the obvious drama unfolding in our little circle. Isabella, Dad said, his voice breaking, how do we fix this? How do we make this right? I looked at these people who had raised me, who had shaped me, who had spent 3 years making me feel small and unsuccessful while I was quietly building an empire. The hurt was deep and real, but so was the love. I don't know if you can, I said honestly. For 3 years you've treated me like a charity case. You've discussed my supposed poverty in front of me like I was deaf. You've excluded me from financial conversations because you assumed I couldn't contribute. We were trying to be kind, Carmen said weakly. Were you? Or were you trying to feel superior? I asked. Because there's a difference between kindness and condescension. The question hung in the air like an accusation. Around us, the party continued, but our little corner of the ballroom had become a bubble of revelation and reckoning. What happens now? Antonio asked quietly. I considered the question. What did happen now? How do you rebuild relationships that were built on false assumptions and years of accumulated hurt? How you know the truth, I said. The question is what you do with it. We want to do better, Mom said, reaching for my hand. Please tell us how to do better. I looked down at her manicured fingers, still shaking from shock, and felt the complicated tangle of love and hurt that defined our relationship. Start by seeing me, I said. Not the version of me you created in your heads, but the actual person standing in front of you. Start by asking questions instead of making assumptions. Start by treating me like an equal instead of a project. Dad nodded vigorously. Yes. Absolutely. Whatever you need. I need you to understand that success isn't just the kind you recognize, I said. I need you to value my achievements even when they don't look like yours. I need you to respect my choices even when you don't understand them. The weight of 3 years of hidden hurt was finally being lifted, and it felt both liberating and exhausting. The money, Sophia said quietly. The support you've been giving, what happens to that? I smiled sadly. It continues. Because despite everything, I want this family to succeed. I want Dad's construction company to thrive. I want Mom's biotech research to change the world. I want all of you to be happy and successful. Even after how we've treated you? Carmen asked, genuine shame in her voice. Especially after how you've treated me, I said. Because that's what love is. It's not conditional on whether people appreciate it or recognize it or even deserve it. The party swirled around us. 300 guests celebrating 30 years of marriage while unaware of the drama unfolding in our corner. The jazz quartet played on, the champagne flowed, and the carefully planned celebration continued. But for my family, everything had changed. The daughter they'd pitted was their secret benefactor. The failure they'd worried about was more successful than any of them. The assumption they'd lived with for 3 years had been shattered as completely as Mom's champagne flute. There's one more thing, I said quietly. This party, this beautiful celebration you're so proud of. I paused, watching their faces. The venue, the catering, the flowers, the jazz quartet, the photographer, the custom linens. All of it was paid for by Sterling Capital Management. By me. The final revelation hit them like a tidal wave. Mom's face went through every color of the spectrum before settling on a pale green that matched her nausea. You paid for our anniversary party? She whispered. I wanted you to have the celebration you deserved, I said. I wanted this to be perfect for you even if you never knew where the money came from. Dad was crying now, tears streaming down his face without shame. Isabella, I'm so sorry. We're all so sorry. I know, I said, and I meant it. The question is whether you're sorry enough to change. As I looked around at my family, shocked, ashamed, but finally seeing me clearly for the first time in years, I felt something shift inside me. The secret was out. The truth was finally in the open. Whatever came next, at least it would be built on reality instead of assumptions. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start rebuilding what we'd lost. The jazz quartet played on, the party continued, and my family began the long process of learning who their daughter really was.